What's going on, folks? We're live at LEEMAN-X Radio, where we have our special guest, Professor Morton. Professor Morton explains what the fuck happened in Vietnam. What was that war about? Inquiring minds want to know. And here we go live. Let's listen in on Professor Morton as he answers some important questions.
Correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen. I'm obviously oversimplifying this, but the Vietnam War kind of reminds me of like the how Christians back then forced their ways on other groups that they deemed not clean, or trying to convert everyone to Christianity because they're trying to save them. That's kind of what I think happened with Vietnam, where the United States went to Vietnam to save the Vietnamese people from this supposed enemy, where they're trying to liberate them and save them when there was no one there. And instead, they were fucking killing innocent people, civilians, ruining people's lives, destroying their crops and homes. And I mean, good for the Vietnamese that they fought back. And it was obviously not it was a stupid war, but correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I'm not that familiar with Vietnam, so please enlighten me. Vietnam War is one of those things that I wasn't really talked that much about in my history class. Maybe because it was an unpopular war. We kind of skimmed through it, if I recall. But if I remember, it was basically, it was an unpopular war, and I think there was a scare that I think the North Vietnamese were kind of like North and South Korea, and there was a communism scare, and so the United States, being the patriotic defender of people and stuff, sent out to save the Vietnamese from this tyranny. And I think they were expecting people, to welcome them with love and cheers, but it was the opposite. The Vietnamese they didn't want them there. They didn't need help they didn't need to be saved from anyone. And in fact, we were basically the invaders. So I think that's what it was. I'm not sure.
Let's go. Professor Morton's got to dust off the old chalkboard again. Vietnam is a very long, complicated, not just one war, but actually a series of wars that start during World War II and before. And I'm not super knowledgeable about Vietnam, but yeah, Jesse, you're basically on the right path. What essentially happened was that during the colonial period in the 17 and 1800s, the French went and colonized Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and all those countries. And they called that area Indochina. So Indochina. And during World War II, Indochina got occupied, Vietnam got occupied by the Japanese, because the Japanese were running all over. And there's a bunch of really complicated fighting where it's like they got occupied by the Japanese, and they got retook by the Free French, and then the Vichy French took it over, and then the Japanese got kicked out. But the long story short is the Vietnamese were led by a guy called Ho Chi Minh, who after World War I, all the way back then, was like, oh, we see you're giving all the white people in Europe autonomy. You're getting all the Poles get Poland, and the Slovaks get Slovakia, whatever. Or actually, they got Czechoslovakia, but whatever. All the people are getting their own country. Can we have our own country? And they're like, no, you're a commie and an Oriental. Get the fuck out of here. So after World War II, there was a resurgence of fighting where Ho Chi Minh's insurgency were called the Viet Minh. The Viet Minh wanted to kick the French out of Vietnam, and all throughout the 1950s, the French were in Vietnam before us. And what finally happened is they agreed to a peace where not everybody liked Ho Chi Minh. So South Vietnam became a capitalist country that was kind of a puppet of the United States and the Western powers, and North Vietnam became a country that was a puppet between the Soviets and the Chinese. And so you had North Vietnam and South Vietnam. In the 60s, you got all throughout the 50s or all throughout the 60s and the late 50s, when South Vietnam was its own country, it was mostly run by a small group of guys who were basically dictators who did whatever the Western powers wanted, and they were abusive to the South Vietnamese people. They're predominantly Roman Catholics, a super minority in Vietnam. Those people who were basically in cahoots with the colonizers were basically Catholic. And so they would strip land away from Buddhists, and they would like give it to their friends, and they would fucking do all kinds of stuff. There's a famous image of a Vietnamese monk who was a Buddhist monk setting himself on fire. He was not protesting the war; he was protesting the South Vietnamese government, because that's how unpopular they were. They were never liked in South Vietnam as a government, and everybody knew that they were in the fucking pocket of the West. So North Vietnam under Ho Chi Minh, now called Uncle Ho, in his communist country, they invaded South Vietnam in an attempt to reunite the country under communism. The United States basically in 1964 was like, okay, we're going to like, in the early 60s they started sending advisors over there. These guys were like Green Berets and SEALs and stuff like that. And in 1964, the amount of advisors basically escalated into a war. It was like a boots on the ground situation where they're going to go in there and basically fight the battle for the South Vietnamese. We're going to prop up their military. We're going to do this and that. And just like in Afghanistan, we tried propping up their military and getting them to fight and giving them all this equipment, and it was never very effective. The South Vietnamese soldiers fought very hard, did a pretty good job most of the time, but their commanders were unbelievably corrupt. They were constantly selling off equipment and stuff like that to the north. They were basically, needed to be bribed to do anything. And so there's a military effort that ended up a disaster. North Vietnamese fought as the North Vietnamese Army, or the NVA, and they invaded and they did conventional warfare against the southern forces with American, Australian, South Korean, and South Vietnamese. But they pretty much tried to avoid all out-and-out firefights whenever they could, whenever possible. The United States pretty much won every firefight they ever got into in Vietnam. So the Vietnamese figured out pretty quickly is just don't get into firefights with them. Just shoot a couple of guys and run back into the jungle. Us in the South, an insurgency called the VC, or the Viet Cong, or just Charlie, because in NATO phonetic alphabet you say Victor Charles. They just called them Charlie. What they did is they basically were the people in the villages that guy was talking about. They would basically go and booby trap shit. They'd get a rifle and go shoot off 10 rounds and run away and do stuff like that. And that was kind of how they were. They were very effective. And they could never beat the Americans in a straight gunfight, but they could bleed them dry. Like thousands of Americans died just like that guy described, getting shot here and there, sniped here and there, and then they never give them an enemy to fight. And of course, American troops committed massacres. They fucking killed innocent people. They fucking burned down villas, what they called Zippo raids. They did all this horrible shit. And that only made resistance against them grow stronger and stronger. So in 1968, when that guy was in the war, they had what was called the Tet Offensive, where the generals in North Vietnam ordered the communist forces in the South to basically try to fight like conventional soldiers, and they did all these raids all over. Oh, hold on, I got a call. So, by the late 60s, a lot of Americans were sitting around going, why the fuck are we fighting this war? The Vietnamese don't seem to want us there. We're killing lots of civilians. We're spraying Agent Orange all over the fucking place and poisoning motherfuckers. What are we doing? And that's kind of where you have like the hippie anti-war movement kind of coming in. And in 1968, the Vietnamese launched the Tet Offensive, in which they basically activated all their southern Vietnamese guerrilla cells at once and had them try to go toe-to-toe with the U.S. military. And they were able to overrun a bunch of outposts and bases initially until the American military turned around and stomped them flat and killed them all. They were never supposed to fight like that. They were supposed to do ambushes and sniper missions. They weren't supposed to fight like that. But in America, on TV, the Tet Offensive was being reported as a success by the hands of the Vietnamese, and it made America look like it was losing the fucking war. And so all these news footage was coming back to the United States of American bases and stuff like that being overrun and Americans getting killed. So even though America won the battle, they were losing the morale, they were losing the American people, and they had already long lost faith of the South Vietnamese people. They started to lose the war in terms of their will to fight. So in 1973, so the war dragged on for another 5 years. 1973, the United States basically, after having some really, really heavy action and doing one of the biggest bombing raids in American fucking history, world history maybe, America basically sat down with North Vietnam and South Vietnam and was like, look, we're going to leave. North Vietnam, you need to respect South Vietnam's borders and cut this shit out. And Ho Chi Minh said, oh, okay, yeah, go ahead and go. We'll have the Paris Peace Accords in the early 70s, and we'll respect South Vietnam's borders. And in 1974, the North invaded the South and basically crushed their fucking forces because they didn't have American support anymore, and united Vietnam under North Vietnam under the communists. And around that same time, they also fought with Cambodia because Pol Pot was in there and he was doing fucking genocide. Ho Chi Minh was like, what the fuck are you doing? That's crazy. And it also had gotten into a tiff with the Chinese. So in 1975, they immediately fought a war with China. And so, yeah, basically from 1945 to 1975, Vietnam was in some kind of continuous warfare all over against everybody. And there's so many fucking mines left over from the 3 different fucking wars fought over 30 years that happened there that, like, people are still getting blown up for them by today. So that's kind of Vietnam in a nutshell.
Thank you, Professor Morton, for enlightening us. I thought I was on the right track. I obviously knew I was missing key elements and I was oversimplifying it, but I do remember it being similar to like a North-South Korea. We had North Vietnam, South Vietnam, and then there was communism. And I think that's what that's at least the main points that I remember. Good old USA, always being painted as the good guy, but never the bad guy. And I do remember them discussing that there was a lot of disinformation, what was actually happening, like in real and during the war, and then what was being said to like the public. It was a mess.
Yeah, me and John were just talking. Yeah, it's like in World War II, before World War II and after World War II, actually, during World War II, America backed the nationalists, the Chinese nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek, and they were fighting the Chinese.
Whoa, Professor Morton is on fire, but we gotta take a break. I'm sorry, guys. We'll be back for another episode another time soon. I hope you guys like it. Please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace out.